Right now, deep beneath the feet of nearly 40 million people in California, the most famous fault line on Earth is moving. But it is not moving with the sudden, violent jolt that everyone has spent the last century preparing for. There's no roar of collapsing concrete and no alarms are blaring. The seismometers in San Francisco and Los Angeles are drawing completely flat, peaceful lines. And that is exactly what has geologists terrified. In July of 2026, a groundbreaking study utilizing advanced machine learning analyzed nearly a decade of deep crustal data. What they discovered changed everything we thought we knew about tectonic stress. For decades, the scientific consensus was simple. When a fault line locks, it stays completely still until it violently breaks. But the San Andreas is not staying still. It is actively slipping in slow motion. These silent movements are known as slow slip events. They are essentially silent earthquakes that release massive amounts of energy over days, weeks, or even months without ever being felt at the surface. You would think this slow release of energy is a good thing that relieves pressure on the fault. But scientists have just confirmed that these silent tremors are doing the exact opposite. They are transferring immense stress directly toward the shallow, locked zones that sit right beneath California's major cities. Today, we are going to break down the terrifying reality of what is happening in the dark beneath California. We will explore how artificial intelligence just unlocked a signal we were completely blind to, and why this silent shift means the countdown to the big one may have just accelerated. Before we descend miles into the Earth's crust to look at the data, I want to ask you a personal question. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you have ever personally felt the ground lurch beneath your feet, and what your very first instinct was. Reading your real-life experiences in the comments is always incredible, and it shows the true human stakes of what we are discussing today. If you want to understand the active forces reshaping our planet without the sensationalist media noise, hit the subscribe button right now. It takes 1 second, it is completely free, and it ensures you never miss a critical geological update. Let us aim for 7,500 likes on this video so the algorithm pushes this vital scientific breakdown to the people who need to see it most. Now, let us get into the silent anomaly. To understand what scientists just found, we have to travel to a tiny, dusty town in central California called Parkfield. If you look at a map, Parkfield looks completely insignificant. But to geologists, this tiny town is the undisputed earthquake capital of the world. Parkfield sits directly on top of the transition zone of the San Andreas Fault, where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate slide past one another. Because of this unique position, the Earth here is monitored by one of the most dense networks of scientific instruments on the planet. Deep holes have been drilled hundreds of meters into the solid granite. Inside these deep boreholes sit incredibly sensitive instruments called strain meters. A strain meter does not measure shaking like a traditional seismometer. Instead, it detects when the solid rock deep underground is squeezed or stretched by even a fraction of a millimeter. For years, these strain meters recorded endless streams of background data. To human eyes, looking at these charts was like looking at static on an old television screen. It looked like random, completely meaningless noise. But in July of 2026, a team of researchers from the German Research Center for Geosciences published a study that shattered that assumption. They did not rely on human analysis to read the charts. Instead, they fed nearly a decade of high-resolution strain meter data into a highly advanced artificial intelligence model. This AI was specifically designed to recognize micro-patterns that are completely invisible to the human eye. What the AI uncovered deep in the data was astonishing. The San Andreas Fault was executing a series of highly organized, repeating slow-motion slip events. Deep down, at depths where the rock is hot and slightly ductile, the plates were sliding past each other without producing a single detectable seismic wave. Let us put this into perspective so we understand the physics of what this means. When an ordinary earthquake strikes, the rock ruptures and slips several feet in a matter of seconds. The energy is released instantly, sending destructive seismic waves rippling to the surface. A slow slip event is entirely different. It might involve the exact same amount of physical movement, releasing the energy equivalent of a magnitude 6.0 or even 7.0 earthquake. But instead of happening in 5 seconds, the entire slip occurs over 3 weeks. Because the energy is released so slowly, the ground never actually shakes. You could be standing directly on top of the epicenter of a massive slow slip event, and you would feel absolutely nothing. Your coffee cup would not ripple, and your dog would not bark. For a long time, seismologists believed these slow slips were theoretically impossible on transform faults like the San Andreas. They believed these events only happened in subduction zones, where one plate dives beneath another. But the AI has proven that the San Andreas is actively performing these silent maneuvers. If you are an optimist, you might think this is fantastic news. You might assume the fault is releasing its built-up energy safely, acting like a pressure cooker letting off steam. Unfortunately, the physics of tectonic plates is never that kind. In fact, the reality is far more dangerous. To understand why these silent slips are a terrifying warning sign rather than a safety valve, we need to look at how a fault line actually stores and redistributes energy. Think of a fault line not as a clean, smooth crack, but as a massive, jagged zipper made of solid rock. Parts of this zipper are deep underground, where temperatures are extremely high. Here, the rock is hot enough to flow and slide more easily. Other parts of the zipper are shallow, cold, and incredibly rigid. These are called the locked zones. This is where the rock is tightly wedged together by immense friction, refusing to budge. When the tectonic plates move at about 2 inches per year along the San Andreas, they push against these locked zones. The rock cannot slide, so it physically bends. The energy is stored as elastic strain, exactly like a giant metal spring being compressed tighter and tighter. Now, let us look at what happens when a slow slip event occurs in the deep, warmer section of the fault. As the deep fault slips silently, it successfully relieves the stress in that specific deep zone. But that massive amount of energy cannot simply vanish into thin air. As the deep rock slides forward, it shoves all of that accumulated tectonic weight directly into the rigid, locked zone above it. Instead of acting as a release valve for the whole fault, the slow slip is acting like a hydraulic jack. It is actively pumping more and more stress into the shallow locked zone, loading the spring even faster. And the shallow locked zone is exactly where we live. The shallow locked zone is the top 10 to 15 miles of the Earth's crust. It is the zone that, when it finally fails, produces the destructive shaking that levels cities. The researchers demonstrated that these silent earthquakes are not isolated, random anomalies. They are highly organized, recurring events that actively dictate the stress conditions of the San Andreas. The AI showed that every time a silent slip occurs, a wave of intense stress is pushed upward. This stress creeps closer and closer to the breaking point of the locked, shallow crust. This explains a mystery that has puzzled California seismologists for years. Why do certain segments of the San Andreas Fault seem to display tiny clusters of microearthquakes right before a larger event? It is because the silent slip deep below is loading the upper crust. It forces small, weak points to pop like warning flares before the main structural failure. But there is a second, even more urgent discovery that was made by researchers from the University of Bern in Switzerland. They built a highly sophisticated four-dimensional model of Southern California's fault systems to calculate current stress levels. Their conclusion was incredibly stark. The Southern San Andreas Fault has now reached its highest accumulated stress level in over 1,000 years. The southern section of the fault, running from the Salton Sea up through the Coachella Valley and past San Bernardino, has not ruptured in a major earthquake since the year 1857. For nearly 170 years, the tectonic spring has been wound tighter and tighter without a single major release. Now, combine these two pieces of science. You have a fault system that is already at a 1,000-year record high in terms of stored stress. And deep beneath it, silent earthquakes are actively and continuously shoving even more stress into those highly volatile locked zones. The system is loaded, primed, and receiving a constant silent push. To understand the scale of what we are dealing with, we have to look back at history. The last time the southern San Andreas Fault ruptured on a massive scale was January 9th, 1857. It was the Fort Tejon earthquake, estimated at a massive magnitude 7.9. The rupture was so violent that it tore a physical scar through the California earth that was 225 miles long. The ground slid horizontally by as much as 30 feet in some places, and the shaking lasted for up to 3 full minutes. In 1857, California was practically empty. The entire population of Los Angeles was just over 4,000 people, and most structures were single-story adobe homes. Because of this, only 2 people were killed in the entire event. Today, the Los Angeles metropolitan area is home to over 13 million people. If a magnitude 7.9 rupture occurred along that exact same corridor today, the outcome would be fundamentally different. Many people assume that because California has strict building codes, a modern city like Los Angeles would ride out a major earthquake with minimal disruption. They assume it would behave much like Tokyo, but that assumption ignores a critical geological difference between the two regions. Japan's largest earthquakes occur dozens of miles offshore, deep beneath the ocean floor in subduction zones. While the shaking is immense, the distance allows some of the most violent high-frequency energy to dissipate before it hits land. The San Andreas Fault does not sit offshore. It runs directly through the dirt of California. It passes directly under freeways, cuts through vital water aqueducts, slices through natural gas pipelines, and sits directly adjacent to massive population centers. Furthermore, the geology of the Los Angeles basin acts like a giant bowl of jelly. The city is built on top of a deep basin filled with soft, river-deposited sediment. When seismic waves from a San Andreas earthquake hit this soft basin, they do not just pass through. They bounce around, amplifying the shaking and causing the ground to behave almost like a liquid. Under these conditions, the classic survival drills are vital for personal safety, but they cannot protect the wider infrastructure from failing. A joint study by the USGS and the Southern California Earthquake Center estimated that a major southern San Andreas rupture would immediately sever the three main aqueducts that import most of Los Angeles water. It would rupture major natural gas lines, igniting hundreds of simultaneous fires across the basin. Water pressure would fail instantly, leaving firefighters completely helpless. Key transportation corridors, including the Interstate 15 over Cajon Pass, would be physically offset, cutting off the city's supply lines for weeks. The estimated economic damage would easily surpass $200 billion, resulting in thousands of casualties and hundreds of thousands of displaced residents. And yet, the public remains largely unaware of the silent mechanism that is actively setting this scenario in motion. We look at the surface, see that nothing has happened today, and assume we have plenty of time. But the AI data from Parkfield is telling us that the clock is ticking and the gears are turning constantly in the dark. If the threat of a single fault rupturing was not enough, the latest physics-based models built by the Swiss team revealed an even more complex hazard. It involves a geographic feature northeast of Los Angeles known as the Cajon Pass. Cajon Pass is a narrow mountain pass that serves as the main artery for roads and rail lines entering the LA basin from the east. But geologically, it is a highly volatile junction where the San Andreas Fault meets another massive fault system, the San Jacinto Fault. For a long time, geologists treated these two systems as completely separate entities. They assumed a rupture on one would not affect the other. But the new models revealed that Cajon Pass acts as an earthquake gate. Under normal conditions, the high-stress barrier at the pass acts as a closed gate, preventing a rupture on one fault from jumping to the other. But because both systems have been accumulating stress for over a century, the stress levels on both sides of the gate have become almost perfectly synchronized. The researchers found that when the stress levels are this close, the earthquake gate is effectively unlocked. This means that when the San Andreas finally ruptures, the crack will not stop at Cajon Pass. It will jump. It will trigger a simultaneous multi-fault rupture that tears down both the San Andreas and the San Jacinto faults at the exact same time. A double rupture of this scale would produce an earthquake of magnitude 7.8 or higher, simultaneously hitting the Los Angeles Basin, the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, Riverside, and the Coachella Valley. There would be no safe side of the metro area. The entire region would take a direct hit from a complex, multi-fault rupture zone. And remember, the silent, deep, slow slips are continuously feeding stress directly toward this unlocked gate. Every single week that passes, these silent events are aligning the stress levels of these two distinct fault systems. They are making a joint, catastrophic rupture far more likely. Seismologists are no longer asking if these faults can talk to each other. They are actively watching them communicate through silent strain, preparing the ground for a massive structural failure. It is incredibly easy to look at this scientific data and feel a sense of absolute helplessness. When we talk about forces that can slide massive tectonic plates and tear mountain passes apart, the individual human feels completely insignificant. But as we have seen in highly prepared countries like Japan, geology does not dictate the final impact of a disaster. Human preparation does. You cannot stop a tectonic plate from moving, and you cannot prevent a slow slip deep in the earth from transferring stress. But you can absolutely control how prepared your immediate environment is when that stress finally reaches the surface. Seismologists and emergency planners constantly emphasize that the first 72 hours after a major earthquake are the most critical. In a major San Andreas rupture, emergency services will be completely overwhelmed. Water lines will be dry, and the power grid will likely be offline for days. Having a basic emergency kit is not about paranoia. It is about practical self-reliance. You need at least 1 gallon of water per person per day for at least 3 days. You also need non-perishable, high-energy food that does not require cooking or refrigeration. Make sure you know exactly where your home's main gas shutoff valve is, and keep a wrench nearby to prevent post-earthquake fires. Finally, bolt heavy bookshelves, wardrobes, and your water heater to the wall, studs to prevent them from falling. These simple steps do not require millions of dollars or decades of engineering. They require a single afternoon of preparation. If every household in California took these simple steps, the societal impact of the big one would be cut in half instantly. The Earth has been active for 4.5 billion years, grinding and sliding tectonic plates long before we ever arrived. The San Andreas Fault is not our enemy. It is simply a physical consequence of living on a dynamic, living planet. But the new science of 2026 has pulled back the curtain on a process we were completely blind to. It has shown us that the fault is not sleeping. Deep down, in the silent dark, it is constantly moving, transferring stress and shifting the weight of the continent toward a critical threshold. The silent slip is a warning. It is the Earth, whispering its intentions before it finally speaks in a roar. The question is not whether the ground will shake. The question is whether we will use this silent warning to prepare, or simply wait for the silence to end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave your experiences in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel for more deep geological analysis, and hit that like button to help spread this vital science. Stay safe, stay prepared, and I will see you in the next one.